Started here. I think there'll be a few more people joining in. So I'll just start by introducing everyone. I'm Luke Hamer from Sakai Technologies. We have on the line Charles Hamer, who's the founder and CEO of Sakai Technologies. And we have Stephen Bizon, who's our developer and also a partner at Sakai Technologies. And then we have James James Kovacevic from Eruditio, who will be leading the webinar. So I think at this point, I'll hand over the reins to James, and I think he's going to do a little bit of a brief introduction, and then we'll get into the actual webinar.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about how do we save time with scheduling and SAP. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've been a maintenance planner, scheduler in the past with SAP and really struggling to figure out how to make it work, how to really get the value out of it, and those sorts of things. So excited to talk to you about that today. But for those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet or present in front of or anything of that nature, my name is James Kovacevic. I am principal instructor with Eruditio. I've been with Eruditio about 2.5 years now. Eruditio is primarily a training company. We focus on maintenance engineering, reliability engineering, asset management, and planning and scheduling as well. And then we have a consulting side of the business as well. Myself, I'm from Windsor, Ontario. Part of the Great White North, but as furthest south as you can get in the Great White North, if you will. Aside from that, I've been involved with maintenance and reliability one way or another for the last 17 years, starting off as an industrial electrician, becoming a maintenance supervisor, a maintenance planner, manager, and then working on maintenance and reliability for a large organization for the North American division and spending time with them across the globe, implementing the same practices in Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, and moved to Eruditio about 2.5 years ago and still doing that type of stuff today. I got 3 crazy kids that keep me busy, 2 dogs and a wife, definitely always on the go with all the travel. Pleasure to speak to you about that, about scheduling with SAP today. So let's get into scheduling with SAP. So the question I get a lot of is, why do we actually have to schedule in SAP? Why can't we just use Excel? What's the problems with using Excel and those sorts of things? And when I started asking, well, why do you want to schedule in Excel? A lot of organizations say, it's challenging to schedule in SAP. Sometimes we don't have a good scheduling process defined. Sometimes certain features and functionality in SAP aren't turned on. Some of the other problems is that, maybe that stuff's turned on, but people just don't know how it works, or there's not a process that specifies how we do that scheduling within SAP. The problem with scheduling in Excel or some of the other, ad hoc tools that are out there is that the data is not always in SAP, and that leads to a lot of problems. Part of it is communication. We don't have good communication going out to our operations friends, other maintenance staff, potentially engineering and supply chain planning. They don't have that information because our work orders and their scheduled dates aren't actually reflected in SAP. Right? That doesn't create visibility for scheduling, and also not just scheduling, but the status of the work requests. If people can't see when their work is tentatively scheduled to be done, that contributes to the perception of the black hole of maintenance or the maintenance backlog, where work orders go and never to be seen or heard from again. If we provide scheduling within SAP, people can see where that work is occurring, when it's occurring, what the status of that work is. So another reason to do that is to build buy-in, right? If we can show that visibility, we can create buy-in to our work management process, our planning and scheduling activities, those types of things. In addition, there's not always good quality data in SAP if we're scheduling outside of it. I know I'm guilty of it. In the past, we would do some stuff in SAP, and then we would move that to an Excel schedule, and we'd micro-schedule and change dates and that in Excel. And we never went back and updated SAP as a result of those changes. So the data in SAP wasn't good. It wasn't auditable. There wasn't a single source of truth. We couldn't properly measure performance across sites because the problem was everyone had their own data in Excel, and it never reflected in SAP. A couple other reasons why we really want to get data and schedule within SAP is it's actually less work. I've come to learn that working through these workarounds with Excel or other tools, it's a lot of work to export, clean up the data, get it into Excel, manage it, massage it in Excel, and create a schedule that's workable. And it actually creates a lot more work, especially when you got to go back and update that data in SAP. Lastly, we want to manage our performance of our process. So understanding what are our KPIs, what's our schedule compliance, how much time have we spent on preventative work versus corrective work versus breakdown work. All those things are very, very important to understand how our work management process is functioning, as well as some of the reliability processes. If that data is not within SAP and it's in Excel spreadsheets and that sort of thing, calculating those KPIs can be a very time-consuming process. It can also be very inconsistent in that data, and those KPIs are going to reflect that inconsistency. The idea here with scheduling within SAP is that we want to eliminate all this extra work that we're doing and create a simple way to create a schedule in SAP that's going to free us up time, right? If we have a systematic approach where we're doing a rolling scheduling, we have PMs leveled, we have all these things, and I'll talk more about those in a moment, it's going to free up a tremendous amount of time with our staff. I remember when I was a planner creating schedules in Excel, calculating SAP, managing that data, I was spending at least 3 or 4 hours a week calculating KPIs. I was spending at least 2 to 3 hours pulling the data out of SAP, cleaning it up, and getting it ready to go in the Excel spreadsheet, and then massaging that data there. There's also communicating that work back to SAP, changing work order statuses, dates, all those things. It was easily 10 to 12 hours a week that I've spent managing that data back and forth, and that is just not value-added time. We hire our planners because we want them to be planning work, thinking of the future, and if they're managing that data, that's not helping us. That's not moving us from that reactive to that proactive state. So now that we understand why we need to schedule within SAP, some of the time wasters that we have, let's get into what do we actually need to make a schedule work. So we typically want to schedule our work to the week and then micro-schedule it to the day within SAP. But it's not as simple as just lining up people and work orders. There's a lot more that goes into it. The first thing we got to consider are our people, are our skills. How much resources do we have available to do work? Do we have 40 mechanics working 40 hours a week? Do we have 10 mechanics working 40 hours a week? We need to understand those types of things so we can level load our schedule based on available resources. Now, I'm often asked, well, how much resource should we be scheduling to? We're aiming to 100% of available hours. So if we have those 10 people working 40 hours a week, that's 400 hours. Take away their breaks and vacation time out of that, and that's the amount of time we should be scheduling for, 100% of available time. But it's not just that simple. We also need to consider what parts do we need to do the work, right? Parts availability is a major constraint in a lot of the scheduling activities. So we need that data as well. And if we're using SAP properly, we can easily leverage a report like IWBK or material availability options out of IW38, which is going to show us by work order what parts are needed, has the PO been issued, has the parts been received, the quantity required. We're going to see all those different things, right? But we need to schedule within SAP and have all the data within SAP to do that. The next thing we're going to need to understand is the equipment availability. Now, with SAP, if you're managing work centers properly and supply chain planning is using it, we can see the visibility of equipment availability. We can know what lines or work centers are running at what point, and we can link that up to our maintenance system so we can see and slot in maintenance work that actually blocks it from supply chain planning. We can do all those things. It's not easy, but we can do it. Then we also got to coordinate the special equipment or tools. Those types of things we need to define, and having that in SAP is also important under the production resource and tools. We define those, we can start scheduling properly. In addition to all that, all those constraints that we're managing from a scheduling standpoint, we also need to have our work order information, right? The work order number, the description, the scheduled start and finish date. What work center or work centers do we need to perform that task? What's the system status? Can we do this work while the equipment's running, or does it have to be shut down? What's the work order status, right? What's the duration of work? How many operations do we have? What's the estimated craft hours? And then we also need to understand the priority of that work, which can come in a variety of different ways. We can manage that through a combination of work type and asset criticality, giving us an ultimate priority, We can just have a straight priority number. There's lots of different ways to tackle that, but we need all that information to manage our schedule properly. Now, even with all this information, scheduling in SAP can still be difficult, right? And oftentimes I find there's one major driver that creates a lot of issues from scheduling within SAP, and it comes down to work leveling, right? If I were to go look at a lot of SAP implementations and go look at a lot of customers' data, I run IW19. It's a simulation. It'll show us when the PMs are coming. It'll forecast out the demand based on date and all those different things. And if I were to run that over a period of time, what I would see is I would see something similar to this top graphic here, where the time is all over the place. All right, we have our available capacity in hours for man hours, but you see the required capacity is all over the place. Some weeks we have a little bit of PM. Some weeks we have a lot of PM. Some weeks we have more than we can actually complete. That causes a tremendous amount of issues scheduling in SAP and scheduling in general. Now, when we have a situation like this, we're managing all of the work orders instead of just managing the correctives and repairs and projects that are coming in. We're managing every single PM. That is a tremendous amount of work, and it's not really that value added. So what we got to do is we got to level it and get it similar to what we see at this 52-week schedule down here in the bottom right. That way we manage the correctives. We're not managing all the PMs. It's going to save us a tremendous amount of time. Now, how we get there is we're going to use IP19. We're going to run that simulation, figure out when all this work is occurring, and then look at moving call dates. Now, obviously, we might not want to move a call date out because that would increase that interval between PM inspections. So we might reduce it and pull it forward and do it a little early just so that we start lining up our dates. The idea here is that we want to level load our PMs for resourcing, but we also want to line it up based on the equipment. For example, in week 1, we might be doing line 1. In week 3, we might be doing lines 2 and 3. Week 5, we might be having lines 4 and 5 with our PMs. We're going to try and level load these PMs, not only just by resource, but by work center. So supply chain planning knows that every 2 weeks or once a month, we need each line for 4 hours or 8 hours. We can set up that standardization, and it helps them, it helps us, and it makes scheduling that much easier. Now, that's the first thing we can do within SAP is with IW19, run that simulation and start level loading our PMs. There's a lot of work behind that. If you want to learn more about that and how I kind of approached it with SAP in the past, you can reach out, but we're not going to dive too much more into that in this session. The next thing we got to do is start a rolling schedule or progressive scheduling. Now, how we did this in SAP was very simply working through and establishing an initial review process for our work orders. So what that really meant was simply the planner and the maintenance supervisor, or maybe an operations representative, would look at all the new work orders coming into the system every morning, and they would ask themselves, is this an emergency work? Is this something that we have to do this week? And if the answer was yes, it bypassed the planner and went right to the maintenance team leader, maintenance supervisor for execution that week. If the answer was no, and it's not an emergency, then between the three of them, they look at the priority. They kind of figure out, okay, based on our knowledge and experience, this is going to be likely have to be done in 2 to 3 weeks. This may be done in 6 weeks out. Hey, we don't have the parts for that. That's 8 weeks out. And what they would do during that process is, as they're having these conversations, is they would start to use revisions for each work order to slot them out anywhere from 2 to 8 to 12 weeks out in advance. And what that allowed us to do is start creating a rolling schedule. Did we have to move some of those? Absolutely, we had to move some of those around. But it started to establish a basic rolling schedule, and it also gave the planners their priorities. Obviously, the work slotted for next week using that revision, we got to plan and make sure that's ready to go first. Then 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, so on and so forth. It allowed us to build this progressive scheduling, or this rolling schedule, which made managing all of the work in SAP that much easier. One of the other things you need to consider from a scheduling standpoint is we typically want about 30% of our work to be PM and PDM activities. Right? About 60% of that is going to be corrective. All right, 10% of that is going to be those breakdowns, the emergency work, and we're going to have about 10% requested, which is the projects, those types of things. All right. Now, every organization will be slightly different. You may have a little bit more in the PM, PDM. We can talk about why that might be afterwards. But the idea here is to get that rolling schedule at least 4 weeks out, right? That way we can manage the exceptions, manage those activities coming in last minute, and we're not doing a mad scramble to get that to work. Now, I mentioned revisions, and I want to make sure everyone understands what revisions are before we walk into SAP and see kind of how I would do this using the specific transaction codes and such. So revision codes
Sorry, this might be a good time just to reiterate, we've had a number of people join that if you have any questions, feel free to ask and just enter them into the chat.
Absolutely, and we'll be happy to answer those as we go. And if I don't have time at the end of this, or I don't answer them during, I'll follow up with you individually to answer your specific questions after the webinar. So the revision code is simply, it drives the scheduled start and scheduled finish dates. So in this example here, that 20 represents the year. We got a week number there. There's lots of different ways to set these up, but it's going to drive the scheduled start and scheduled finish dates. So for this week 27 of 2020, we're going to have a scheduled start date of that Monday, June 29th, to Sunday, July 5th. Right? What it does, it gives us that high level scheduling. Here's the week we're targeting to do this work. Right? Other revision codes will be laid out there, and it'll show us, June, week 25, week 26, so on and so forth. Usually these are built out many months in advance, so we can just start slotting in that work and creating that rolling schedule. So how do we actually do this in SAP? Now, I figured the best way to do that was to actually show you SAP and how it works. Right? All right, I'm just going to make sure my screen is sharing properly. All right, so in order to do this with SAP, what we're really going to be doing is we need 2 transaction codes primarily. The first, IW38, the second one, CMO1, and one of the third ones I'm going to mention is IWBK. Those are the 3 transaction codes we're really going to use. So if I log in and I use IW38, we can easily run that. And that's going to give us a list of work orders. So we're going to pull up the dates that we want to look at. We're going to simply run that report. And it's going to give us all the work orders between that period of time. Now, if you notice what's going on the screen, you can see some of the revisions are in place for different weeks, week 25, week 26, week 27, so on and so forth. And you're going to notice that some of the weeks are blank. That's because maybe we haven't prioritized these. They didn't come in through the review process, or maybe they're old work that we got to relook at. A variety of reasons why they might not have those revisions assigned. But this is going to demonstrate what our work orders are, what the status of them are, so on and so forth. Now that we know that some of the revisions are assigned, we can use the next tool, which I'm going to discuss, which is CMO1. CMO1 is capacity planning. And what that's really going to do is let us see how much resources we're actually using or scheduled to use during that period of time. So the first thing you got to do is you got to put in the work center you're going to evaluate. You got to put in your planning group, and you got to put in your plan. Once you have that information in, you can go ahead and run that. And it's going to display a nice little table like you see on the screen. It's going to show you by week what the requirements are. So how much work do you have assigned for that week? What's your available capacity for that week? What you're loaded to, whether it's 75, 80, 100% of that week available capacity, and how much remaining capacity you have. Right? Now this tells us, are we scheduling enough work? We want to get to that 100%. Now, looking at this, I can see that week 25, I don't have enough work for that week. So I have a couple options I can do. One, I can simply go back to IW38 and start assigning revisions to some of that missing work. So I'll show you that approach first. So I may realize that, hey, it's this job here, and this job here. I select these 3 jobs that I want to do during the week of the 25th to bump up that utilization of our crew. I simply go to order, revision, assign revisions, put in my planning plan, and put in that revision code that I want those for, run the little update, and it's going to change the revision code for those 3 specific work orders. Once that is complete, then I can simply go back to my CMO1. I don't have to rerun the report. I can actually go into CMO1, hit this little refresh button here, and run it, and it's going to update my availability. The other thing I can do is I can double click on that specific week to dive into see which work orders are there, what are the requirements, and so on and so forth. It'll show me all that information. Right? Now, the other option we have is instead of actually going through IW38, I may want to pull some work forward from week 26. You just double click on week 26. Say I want to select these 2 work orders and pull those forward to week 25. Check them off in the box. Simply go up to work order header. And open those up, and I can just change the revision code right here for those 2. And it's going to update those start and finish dates for me automatically. Now, obviously, this approach is a little more time intensive. We don't want to do this for a lot of work orders. We just want to do this for some of them. If there's a couple changes, working in CMO1 is a great approach. Now we have that updated. We can go back out to the main sheet and see the changes have been made. Now we're up to 81%. All right, so we're going to try and level load our PMs that way using those revision codes. And then as new work comes in, we're going to review and address through those revision codes. Now, once we feel we have enough work for that week, we got one more activity. We're going to go back to IW38. But what we're going to do is we're going to come down to our revision. We're going to put in our revision there and run IW38 against that. The reason we're doing this is I want to see just the work I have in IW38 so I can check material availability. All right. So now that I have all my work displayed for the week of week 25, I can go ahead and select all that work. And if I go to the go-to command at the top of the screen, I can go down to list of available materials and click that. It's going to give me a nice report that's going to show me the status of all my materials. Now, we don't have material set up in this sandbox of SAP, if you will, but what you will see here is you'll see the order number. So what work order are we is this for? What's the operation? What's the earliest start and latest start date? You'll see the item. So what is the BOM item we're looking at? You'll see a purchase order tab. So it'll tell you if this material's been ordered, what purchase order has it gone out under. It's going to give you the GR column or goods receipt column. You'll have a plus or minus there. Plus being it's been goods receipted, minus meaning it's not there. It'll give you the material number, the material description, how many quantity is required for that particular task, the quantity withdrawn, and the quantity available for check. And if we've received some, it's going to be there. Under this little exception report here, it's actually going to give you a nice little traffic light. If that material is on site or is scheduled to arrive before the scheduled start date, we're going to get a nice green traffic light. If it's scheduled to arrive some point between the scheduled start and scheduled end date, it's going to give us that yellow traffic light. If it's not scheduled to arrive before that scheduled finish date or hasn't been ordered yet, it's going to give you a red traffic light. So this is a good way to check to make sure all the materials are on hand available for that work before you get into the micro scheduling. And what I mean by micro scheduling is assigning to the individual person by day, that type of thing. That's where Sakai comes in and really has the power to manage that on a very easy and simplistic way. Now, before I hand it over to Charles from Sakai to show how we're going to take that weekly schedule built with revisions and transfer that over to Sakai, are there any questions, Luke, that came in that need to be answered at this point?
Yeah, there are. One of the first questions, what is transaction code IP19 used for?
Great question. IP19 is a simulation, and what it will do is it'll simulate all your PM work orders or the system generated work orders with their call dates and required manpower. So it'll show you in two different ways, whether it's a table, or sorry, like a Gantt type chart or a table format, your PM demand and your workload forecasted over a period of time, whether it's the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 1 year. You can forecast that out so you can see when all this work is happening, on what equipment, what day, what resources are required, that sort of thing.
And how do you determine what day is the start of the week?
Usually that is determined within your system. Every organization will have it slightly different. What I would do is I would reach out to your SAP super user and they'll be able to tell you what day is the start of the work week within SAP. Some organizations, it's Saturday, some it's Sunday, some it's Monday. Every organization sets that up differently when they implement SAP.
How do you account for vacations when looking at available labor?
Great question. If your SAP is fully integrated and you're using the human resource information part of it, that will be documented in there. The other way that you can do it is you can go into the individual work centers and you can create a hierarchy of work centers. So this mechanic rolls and this mechanic roll up to this larger work center. You can set that up and create an average. So if you expect on average you have one person out a week, you can factor that in and have that taken out of that larger capacity for that work center.
In order for SAP to generate statistics such as available capacity, is there somewhere we are able to input our MTS manpower, or does SAP pull this from someplace?
So if it's set up integrating HR functions, then it would be pulling potentially from ADP or some other human resource software you have. If it's not set up to support that, you can set it up yourself specific for maintenance. So if you go into the individual work centers, you can set up shift arrangements. You can set up how many people are on a crew. You can set all that up within the work centers themselves. Ideally, it'd be integrated so it's live, it's updated each week, or it's updated real time. If that's not the option, you can set what that default is for each work center individually.
Last question, do you have to use revisions to use CMO1?
No, it will run off start and finish dates, I believe. I use revisions just because it's a quick, easy way to change all those, but I believe it'll run just off the start and finish dates.
Okay, great. Thanks, James. At this point, I'll hand it over to Charles. Let's make him presenter. Thanks again, James. That was great.
So, Charles Hamer, I'm the CEO of Sakai Technologies. Thanks very much, James. I really appreciate that. So today we're going to look at a simple extension to SAP called Sakai that you can use to build your weekly schedule, manage the daily changes, and measure your results. So the tool will ensure that the data that would otherwise be trapped in Excel all keeps in sync with SAP and is available for reporting and analysis. So let's have a look. Let's get rid of this. Oops. I'll start out by clicking the refresh button here, and that will pull over the work orders that James has identified as ready to schedule. It'll organize them by crew. And as it stands, I'm looking at the week of June 15th. So these are all of the work orders from SAP that are ready to schedule, organized by crew. And we can see some information about them, the work order number, revision code, etc. Whatever information that you need to see for your weekly process. But critically, we need to see the estimated hours by trade. So this first work order task has 4 hours of mechanic time. So the next thing, James talked about resource availability at the end. Once you know how much work you have that's ready to schedule, you can look at who's available to schedule it. So I'll click on available hours here. We can see a lineup for a crew. This can come from a system like Kronos or ADP, or you can manage it directly inside of Sakai. What's critical here, the crew, the employees lined up by trade, and anything that's going to claw out of their availability to do work in the upcoming week. So we can see this guy on the bottom has some vacation lined up. And this would be updated dynamically every time you click on the refresh button. So go back to weekly scheduling. If you think of your process, first thing is, I think James said is week 25. So we'll look at all of the work that's queued up for next week. You can see a whole bunch of work orders here. Typically what we would see out there is you might be aware that a particular piece of equipment is already going to be down. So I'll search for that equipment. You can see 5 or 6 work orders here to do, and let's pretend that it's going to be down on Thursday. So we pick off all of that work on that particular piece of equipment that's going to be down and schedule it to Thursday. You'll note that I was just clicking on them. It moved them from the bottom of the screen to the top and from ready to schedule to scheduled. So let's look at what else we got here. So I'll just grab the rest of week 25 here and select it and schedule it. And it goes from the bottom to the top. And I'll draw your attention to the top right here. We can see some green and some gray. This cues your planner to tell you that on Monday, you've used 100% of your mechanic time and 100% of your electrician time, and so on throughout the week. And the goal is to fill up your schedule so that all of your available resources are utilized. I can see on Friday here that I still have some available time. So we could go and look at what we have lined up for next week. And I can start to fill up Friday. I'll just click on them and look at the top right of the screen to see the totals go up until we're into the green. I still have some electrician time. Down here, see what else. And away we go. So, and I'll get rid of it. The idea would be to tune this down to where you've used up all of your resources for the upcoming week. At that point, Sakai is going to save a copy of that schedule for you in the background so that as you're going through the week and you're adding more work orders or pulling them out, or there are unplanned absences, people aren't showing up for work and so on, you can continue to make those changes in Sakai, and all of those transactions will be recorded for you automatically in the background. And that will give you your measurement. We can have a look at that in a minute. So once the schedule is committed, the statuses change again from ready to schedule to scheduled. Oops. And we can look at the daily process. Get rid of this filter. So this schedule that your planners created would be visible to everybody on the shop floor. And as they go through the days of the week, they can see who's assigned what work orders and so on. And it's very easy to make adjustments. I'm just dragging these things back and forth, or I can split them in half. There's no rules here in the background that are going to try and thwart you from making these little changes. It's all built to be very, very fast. We could also consider break-in work. So if I look here for, there's no revision code. So when I press the refresh button, these work orders have come over. We know they're break-ins. I can add them to the schedule to whatever day, and I can also pull stuff out. And again, all of those transactions that you're making through the day will be visible and available for your KPIs. There's a series of reports available that will distribute to your work teams that'll show them what their assignments are for the day and for the upcoming week. And lastly, you can indicate in Sakai what work orders have been ready to sign off by simply clicking on a status.
I think Carolyn might have her hand up. Carolyn, do you have a question? Oh, nope, my apologies. Keep going.
Okay. So I'd mentioned some KPI. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So at the end of the week, after you've added break-in work and made whatever changes, Sakai will provide you with a list of KPIs from the CMRP. So we can see them down on the left here. You can click on them. And for something like reactive work, you can click on the icon down here below, and it will highlight the work orders that were broken into the schedule after it was committed, which is a useful tool for communicating with operations. So to conclude, this is a simple and efficient way to manage your weekly schedule and keep everything in sync with SAP. It was designed for maintenance folks on the shop floor It's very little effort to set it up, and it's available to you at your choice. And Luke, are there any questions for me? Otherwise, I'll hand it back over to you.
How could you earmark contingency work?
Could you repeat that question?
How can you earmark contingency work?
By contingency work, I believe that would show up. That would be recorded in SAP, I believe, as a revision code. So however you're recording it now in SAP, we would just make sure that we can see that on the Sakai side, and you would be able to identify it so that you could track it as such.
Okay, and are break-in orders that are scheduled within Sakai changed in the back end at all?
The system is fully integrated, or can be fully integrated, so that anything that you change in Sakai can be reflected back in SAP. It's one of the strengths of the system. It will get rid of the Excel-based stuff where you have data trapped in silos and make sure everything is in sync between SAP and Sakai.
Okay, are there any other questions here, guys? A couple more coming in. Stuart was looping back to the contingency question. Contingency is additional work that can be done when scheduled work is done.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I'll go back into that over here. So anytime you press the refresh button, it's going to bring over work from SAP that's ready to schedule. And to add it to the schedule would just be a matter of pointing on the specific work and clicking on the day. I'll go back to the weekly view here. So this list of work orders down at the bottom is going to be continually refreshed anytime you click the refresh button. So at your option, you'd be able to add more work or pull work out.
And does scheduling trigger a user status?
Correct. So there are a number of different statuses here. It goes from ready to schedule. Once it's scheduled, Sakai changes the status to scheduled, and then again to committed, and then lastly to done. So we showed how we could click on these things indicating that the work order is done.
And are you required to have an SAP account to be able to operate the software?
No.
So thanks again, guys. I think this was very informative, and thank you, James. That was a great brief webinar. So I'll have the recording. I'll edit it down a little bit, and then I'll send it to each of you. And in terms of starting with Sakai, we can get you started with a trial free with a file-based integration. All we need is your schedule, which could be as easy as sharing an Excel dump with us. But to get started, we would just probably do a 15-minute, 30-minute webinar and learn a little bit more about what you're doing and then see how we can help. And furthermore, if you have any more questions or you'd like to get in contact with James to learn more, his contact information is below.